Alright, welcome to another episode of Nathan Builds Robots. Today I'm going to be checking out a tier list that I put together. I've listed basically all of the machines I've tested. S tier are the best of the best, A tier which are very good, B tier which are average, C tier are flawed, D tier are printers that I would throw off a balcony, and I mean that literally. Dollar bills tier, nice printer but over budget for those printers that you'd really like to have but you just simply don't want to take out another mortgage to be able to afford. ZZZ tier, these are like boring printers. We have the question mark tier. If you don't know what a printer is, then you don't have to rank it. So I'll leave a link to this tier list in the description. Check it out if you want to download it and try your own. It's kind of fun and it lets people know where you stand on these different 3D printer brands. It's a great way to alienate and piss off a lot of fanboys at the same time. So I feel like it's a perfect match for my channel. Alright, so here's all our printers. I tried to organize them based on brand, ABC order. Up here we have the Anycubics, AnkerMakes, Artillery, Bambu Lab, Creality, and if there's anything you think I should add to this list, make sure to drop it in the comments below. The requirements for being on this list is it has to be a printer that's for sale today or will be sold in the near future, and there has to be at least one YouTube video about it. But other than that, you can pretty much submit whatever you want. I can add them to this URL, so anyone that visits the site in the future, there might be more options here. Here's the Nathan Builds Robots YouTube channel. That's clearly an S tier. We have a 3D printer pen. I would not recommend a 3D printer pen for anyone. I mean, just look at this terrible looking Bulbasaur. Nobody wants that. Let's start with the Bambu Lab printers. The AMS unit, I would say that's a very good product. A lot of people love their AMSs and it unlocks a multi-material printing capability. P1P, I'm torn between flawed tier and average. I would say it's a very good printer, but at its price point, it's missing a couple of features. And it's clearly not worth getting when you compare it to the P1S. The P1S is just a better printer all around, and that one's going to be an easy S tier. P1S is about $700 plus shipping, and it's fully enclosed. It prints pretty much any material you want. X1C, I would put it in A tier, but at its price point, it's insanely expensive. I just don't know if the value's there. I'd put it here as an average value printer, or a very good printer, keeping the price in mind. Also, I'm going to bump the P1P up to an average tier printer. I think that's a great printer to get started with. It's just not worth it when you compare it to the P1S. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's address some of the Creality printers. This is a CR10 Smart Boring Ender 3 clone, CR10, Boring Ender 3 clone, the belt printer. I don't know if these things are reliable, so I'd probably throw mine off a balcony. Ender 2 Pro, that's either an A tier or an S tier, because this thing gets amazing print quality out of the box, and it's very inexpensive. I'll probably put that as an A tier. There's a few things holding it back, like its proprietary main board. They decided to use like slightly different connectors on it, so that's kind of annoying. That's holding it back from being an S tier, but I really do like this printer. And if they ever come out with an Ender 2 S1, that's gonna be a solid contender for S tier. Here's the Ender 2 Max Neo. That design was really phoned in. They didn't really decide to innovate at all. Now here's the original Ender 3. If this list was being made 3 years ago, that would be an S tier. Everybody loves their Ender 3s. They brought a lot of quality to the table at a low price point, but at this point, it's kind of a boring printer. We'll call it yet another Ender 3 clone, even though it's the original Ender 3, but whatever. And then we got the Ender 3 S1 and Ender 3 S1 Pro. I'm gonna list both of those under boring Ender 3 clone. Technically, I would consider these to be flawed printers because their part cooling out of the box is just kind of insufficient, which if you're paying over $300 for a printer, you should have excellent part cooling. That's part of the equation of what lets you print faster and with higher quality. So the fact that they left that out, I'd put it as a C tier. Once you put some upgrades on it, I could definitely see it being a very good printer. Like throw a motherboard on there and get a better cooling duct. That's a solid A tier, but in its stock configuration, it's a C tier. And since it's just a boring Ender 3 clone, that's a ZZZ tier. Snooze. Same with the Ender 3 S1. The Ender 3 V2, I actually really like this printer, but at the same time it's got flawed part cooling. The part cooling is a little bit insufficient for what this printer is, and it's got a Bowden tube. It just really doesn't hold up that well in today's market. So I probably wouldn't recommend getting an Ender 3 V2 at this point. So it's going in the boring tier. Ender 3 V3 SE. Now this is a printer that's coming out from Creality pretty soon. This is going to be the next edition of an Ender 3, and it looks like they've upgraded the part cooling on here, and they've added some innovative, cool little features. So I'm gonna plop that all the way up here at the S tier. Now we have to confirm that this printer delivers what we're expecting. I looked at a price listing and it's listed for $219, and I imagine if you can find a discount code for that, you can bump it to just under $200, so maybe $199. If it hits that price point and it has all the features of an Ender 3 S1, plus better part cooling, plus better bed leveling, I mean, that's going to be a solid printer for introducing people into 3D printing and just represent one of the best values in the low end of the market. Now, we'll get this printer in for review soon, so we'll see what I actually think of it, but I'm really hopeful that it's going to be a really good printer by Creality. And then we've got Ender 5 Plus. I will put this as an average tier printer. It's probably not the best printer. Considering the price that it is, actually I think it probably more deserves to be a flawed tier printer. I've seen people upgrade the snot out of these to the point where they would be an A or an S. In its stock configuration at its current pricing, that's not the best printer. Then there's the Ender 5 S1. I'm gonna put this as an average tier printer. They've done some upgrades since they first released it, so it has slightly better part cooling, slightly better bed leveling. Really, this thing needs to be running Clipper to unlock its full potential, so actually I'm going to bump that down to a flawed tier. You definitely got to throw some upgrades on there, like a sonic pad or a motherboard. And let's see what other Creality machines we have here. So here's the Ender 6. I think that's going to go off the balcony. It's really big, heavy, doesn't really look like it's all that well designed, so definitely going off the balcony. Same with the Ender 7. It could be a good printer, but there's so many other compelling options on the market that I'd probably be throwing it off the balcony. Here's the K1 Max. That is quite an impressive machine. I'm going to go ahead and put this up here as a very good printer. This isn't an S tier printer because there are a couple issues that I'd like to see Creality resolve, mainly having to do with the bed leveling. So if they can sort that out, that might be an S tier. Even once they fix the bed leveling, it's probably going to stay at A tier, just because it is kind of an expensive machine. There are some issues with serviceability and upgradability, just like with a lot of these new Core XY machines. So I'm going to put that in A tier. It might even be a B tier right now because the bed leveling isn't sorted out. That's kind of unfortunate. The standard K1, I got excellent bed leveling results on my K1, so I'm going to say this is a very good printer. There was issues with the extruder when it first came out, but they've resolved those. They fixed that on the K1 and the K1 Max. Now the only issue is, I guess there aren't really any major issues, other than the fact that they haven't open sourced their files yet. It should be happening sometime this month, according to their announcement. So hopefully we'll be seeing that. And then we've got the CRM4. I really like my CRM4. But unfortunately, I'm going to give it a C tier because my initial unit had some issues where the nozzle fell off. It wasn't tightened properly from the factory or something. And I think it comes with a PTFE lined heat break. It's really missing some features that it needs to be a true industrial high-end machine, and you need to upgrade it. Once you put those upgrades on there, I would call it a very good printer, or even an S tier printer because of the abilities that it unlocks with just the scale of parts you can print. For now, I'm gonna leave it as a C tier. Now my personal CRM4 that I've upgraded, I would put that as a very good printer. I really enjoy using that thing because I can print out unique parts with it. But again, in its stock configuration, you definitely got to put some work in it. Throw a motherboard on there, upgrade the nozzle. There's some upgrades that need to go into it to make it a really good printer. But in its stock configuration, unfortunately, it's a C tier. The last item on the list is the Sonic Pad. It's not really a 3D printer. I think it's a useful accessory, don't get me wrong. It's a little expensive and it's giving you capabilities that should be built into the machine that you're paying for instead of having it sold as an add-on upgrade. So, man, I'll put it as a flawed tier. That's it for the Creality machines. You can see Creality has a formula here where they just decide to clone a bunch of Ender 3s over and over and over again. But they've produced some genuinely good products. There's some good entries here. Here we have the Anycubic Kobra 2. I'm going to put that as a very good printer. It's basically an Ender 3 clone, but it's faster and it's just more capable. If you look at the Ender 3 V3, the spec sheet is almost identical to this Anycubic design. So they could be on the same level. However, Creality is bringing some additional innovations to the market. They've slimlined this down a little bit, and they're adding an additional bed leveling assistant. So I think that bumps it up above this Anycubic design, but this Anycubic should be a good printer. On the topic of slightly better Ender 3s, I definitely have to put the Neptune 4 up here as an S tier. This is an excellent value for a budget bed slinger. It comes in at a price of $260 and it has Klipper. The only downside is that the Klipper implementation does not have Wi-Fi. They didn't put the Wi-Fi chip on there. I mean, it could be a flawed tier, but I would never bash it down that far just over that. I mean, you can plug it into your wireless router and just access it over LAN that way. I still think it's an S tier despite that small shortcoming. I mean, it's bringing Klipper and extremely high-speed printing to budget bed slingers, so that's really admirable of them to do, and I really like the printer. And over here we have the Neptune 3 Max and the Neptune 3 Plus. These are just larger versions of Elegoo's Neptune lineup of printers. I'm going to put the Neptune 3 Max at an A tier. That's going to be a very good printer. It's coming in at an incredible price point. It's got direct drive extrusion, it's got automatic bed leveling, it's got a PEI sheet for the print surface. It just does a ton of things right, and for that it deserves to be an A tier printer. The Neptune 3 Plus is also a very good printer. I would kind of put it as an average printer just because the Max I think is better than the Plus. The Max has a print volume of 420 by 420 by 500. I think it's 500 tall. You're getting an absolutely enormous print volume with this machine, and it's only around $500. You used to have to build a custom machine if you wanted to get that kind of print volume, but you can just buy it from Elegoo with this Neptune Max, and I think that makes it a really awesome printer. It actually might even be an S tier. It's a really close call here, just due to the value of this machine. There's some room for improvement, like they could add Klipper. You know, they're probably going to make an Elegoo Neptune 4 Max, which will be basically this Neptune 4 but scaled up, and I think that's going to be a crazy cool printer. But for now, we'll leave this Neptune 3 in the A tier. Once they throw a Klipper on that, that'll be an absolute crazy machine. I hope I get one of those for review, and I would definitely put it up here in the S tier. And then we've got the Easy 3D X1. That's definitely going off the balcony. Nobody should be buying an Easy 3D printer because they're like $100, but for like $20 more, you can get a genuinely good printer like the Ender 2 Pro or some of the other small cantilever printer designs. Just don't bother with one of these things. Just save your money. Now we've got the Anycubic machines. So personally, I've never reviewed any Anycubic machines, but I've got a couple on the way. I purchased one and they're sending me one for review. Sometimes I like to buy my own printers to do a little bit of an audit, you know, as an anonymous buyer. Who knows if they're sending me a different machine. This one here, the Anycubic Kobra 2, that should be a really nice machine, super fast and full featured. Here's some of their older bed slingers. I think this is the Kobra Neo. It's basically an Ender 3 V2 with like a crappy direct drive extruder. That one's going in the Ender 3 clone. Just kind of a snooze fest. It's only $150, so it could offer excellent value. I might actually put this in the average tier, but since it's so similar to an Ender 3 and kind of boring, I'm going to put it in the snooze tier. Then over here we have the Kobra Max, which is a super large bed slinger, just like the CR-M4 and the Neptune 3 Max. I'm going to put this in the C tier, maybe even the D tier, where I'm going to be throwing this thing off of a balcony. It has a Bowden tube extruder. On a machine this large, you should just go for a direct drive extruder. There's no reason to put a Bowden tube on this. It's just cheaping out on a component that's very important for high volumetric flow rate printing. In my experimentation and testing, I find that direct drive extruders can print 50 to 100% faster, especially when you're pushing really high volumetric flow rates and on really long Bowden tube segments like this. You just end up having a lot of friction built up in that Bowden tube that you eliminate when you go to a direct drive system. So yeah, that's going to be flawed tier, maybe even off the balcony tier. I'll be generous and leave it in flawed tier. And then we've got the Anycubic Kobra Plus. That's gonna also go in the flawed tier. This is basically a slightly smaller version of this Kobra Max. So actually, I'm just gonna straight up throw this one off the balcony. I don't like Bowden tube extruders. Just go with direct drive. Basically every printer should be direct drive because it's just better. The only exception to that rule is on this Ender 2 Pro. That has a short enough Bowden tube segment that I'm okay with having a Bowden tube, as well as some other really small printers. Basically, the amount of friction that you build up in a Bowden tube is related to how much bending and angular curvature you have in there and the length of the tube. So when you have a longer tube, you end up with more friction. If you have tighter bend radiuses, you end up with more friction. If you have more rotations in that coil of Bowden tube, then you end up with more friction. So there's just a lot of downsides, and it's really unpredictable. However, on this Ender 2 Pro, it's not that big of a deal because of that short tube length. Annex Engineering K3. This is like a mini, super fast enclosed printer. It uses a cross gantry. You can see there's 2 rails, and the tool head basically is coincident with the intersection of those 2 rails. Apparently you can like throw 4 motors on there and get things moving around super fast, get crazy high acceleration rates, like even higher than any of the Core XY printers on the market. That's gonna be an A tier. Very good printer. There isn't enough about this printer online for me to bump it up to an S tier. I mean, someone needs to send me one so I can make some videos about it. Then maybe we'll put it in an S tier, but it just doesn't have the publicity that it needs to be a true S tier printer. And then the K3, also a very good printer. However, given the price of the bill of materials, I'm gonna have to bump it down to an average tier printer. The price and how much time you're gonna have to spend putting it together. Yeah, sorry guys. Let's move on to the AnkerMake M5. AnkerMake, they make power banks and cell phone accessories and USB-C cables and stuff. They're a pretty cool brand. I've worked with them in the past. This M5 was their first 3D printer. I would say it's kind of like an average printer. It's reliable, it'll get the job done. It has a PTFE-lined hot end, which makes me want to bump it down to flawed tier. However, I think they've released a new version of their hot end that's all metal, and they should be sending out to their customers for like $1. So once you put that upgrade in there, I'd put it as an average tier printer. Same with this M5C. I'm going to put it here as an average printer. I think it could be good for certain users in the market. The lack of a screen makes me kind of want to bump it down to a C tier, but given the target audience and the use cases and the app that they've built, I'm going to leave it as a B tier. It's an average printer that could be good for an average person. The print quality and reliability is quite good, and the industrial design, it's a quite good looking machine. The cable management is impeccable, so there's definitely some good attributes of this machine that would prevent me from bumping it down any further. This is the Artillery Hornet. I reviewed one. It actually gets really good print quality, and they're super cheap online. You can find these for like $120 on AliExpress. However, it's kind of boring. It's yet another Ender 3 clone. They did some interesting things with the design, and I actually do kind of like it. And then we've got Artillery Sidewinder X2. If I was doing this video a year ago, I would definitely be throwing this thing all the way up here at S tier. This thing was offering a massive build volume, 300 by 300 by 400. It was much bigger than most of the other competitors on the market. They're using an AC heated bed, so it's super quiet when it's in operation. It prints fast. However, due to the increased competition, I think I'm gonna have to bump this down a tier. I still think it's a good value and it's a nice printer. Just the competition is crazy right now, so it's getting bumped down to being a very good printer. Here's the Big TreeTech Pad 7. This is basically a clipper pad, like a Sonic pad, except it's from Big TreeTech. It's open source and it's a lot easier to do modifications and run stock clipper on there. So that's definitely better than the Sonic pad. I'm gonna put that up here as an average tier. It's definitely something that you're only gonna wanna get into if you're really into 3D printer modding. I haven't tried one of these out myself, but they look pretty nice. Here's the Cetus 2. It's a dual extrusion machine. I don't want to get too far into this, but this one's going off the balcony. This is a company that nobody's ever really heard of, and their quality is not really established yet. So buying an expensive printer that's complex and requires using a special slicer and has a bunch of proprietary parts on there, it just doesn't seem like something that I would enjoy using. So I'm going to leave that in the D tier. Alright, so here's the Dremel box. Dremel has started releasing a couple of printers. From everything that I've seen, they appear to be way overpriced, so I'm going to put this in the dollar bills tier. They're not going to be nearly as cost competitive as any of these machines up here. Too expensive. Here's a little machine from Flying Bear. It looks like a cute little machine that's well built, but I don't know what it is. I've never seen anyone review one of these, so I'm going to put it in the question mark tier. I imagine this would be a pretty good printer. Like, I'd probably put it in an average tier if I learned more about it and confirmed that it's not a massive piece of crap. Now here's the Flying Bear Ghost 6. I actually really enjoyed using this printer. I would put it as a B tier, as an average printer, or maybe even an A tier, because it's an enclosed Core XY printer that has excellent print quality and is super moddable, and it comes in at a really low price point. However, I literally threw this one off of a balcony, so I'm going to have to put it in D tier. If I didn't do that, then I would definitely put it in A or B. It really doesn't have any flaws other than mine that went off the balcony. That was not its fault at all. I want to let you know that that was That was basically aggravated assault of a 3D printer by me, and I'm sorry to Flying Bear. I hope they are willing to work with me again in the future. I was just having some, I guess, a momentary lapse of judgment. And then here's the Flying Bear Ghost Reborn 2. I haven't used this printer. I'm going to put it as an average tier printer. If I got one of these in for review and I confirmed that it's actually a nice printer that delivers on its promises, then I might bump it up, but I don't know enough about it. I know that Flying Bear produces some pretty good products, and it should be a nice serviceable Core XY machine running Clipper. We'll just put it as average or maybe question mark. And then we've got FlashForge. Now these are like quasi-industrial grade printers that are on the lower end of the price range. They seem interesting. However, their price points usually start in the thousands instead of the hundreds. So I'm going to put these in the dollar bill section. They're just a little bit out of my price range, and I don't know enough about them. So this is the Adventurer 3 and Adventurer 4. I think they're starting to introduce high-speed printers, and they have a really cool quick swap nozzle system where it's like a cartridge that you can just grab it and pull it out and put a new one in. So that's pretty cool. Fukus Odin, I reviewed this printer. It's pretty nice. It's a direct drive, foldable design, which is cool in its own right. However, it's too similar to an Ender 3, so we're just putting it in the Ender 3 clone category. Boring. I don't know what this thing's called. It's I have one for review, but it just looks like an Ender 3 clone, so we're putting it in the Ender 3 clone category. Oh, here's the shark. This one's the shark, but we're going to put that in the clone category. Just boring derivative machines. I don't know what this one is, but you can see it's got a Bowden tube set up, and it might be a slightly larger form factor, but yeah, boring Ender 3 clone. We haven't got to the PRUSAs yet, so I should address those. We've got some Voron design printers, Voxelab, Sovols, so lots of interesting stuff left here. All right, so let's start with this Formlabs Form 3 or Form 4, I forget what it is. That's an overpriced printer. I can't afford to buy one of those. They're in the thousands of dollars, and it's just like a resin printer. Maybe if I was doing some kind of industrial or scientific applications, I'd be interested in getting one of those. However, you know, it's just out of my price range. Now we have some FLSUN printers. Here's the FLSUN Super Racer and the FLSUN V400. These are high-speed Delta printers. The V400 comes with a FLSUN pad, which is basically like a Sonic pad or a Clipper pad. It just helps you run Clipper and get those insanely high print speeds. I've seen one of these V400s in person. They're absolutely huge. So let's rank both of them. Both of those are going in the flawed tier. Just for the simple fact that they're Delta printers. Nobody likes Delta printers. Get your design straight. You have your X-axis and your Y-axis. Why would you have 3 Z-axes? It makes no sense. You've got a bunch of extra bearings in there adding slop. I just don't like it. This is the GEETECH A30. It takes 3 spools of filament and feeds them into a single hot end, so that's pretty interesting in its own right. They're all Bowden tubes. I think this printer is a little bit interesting due to the 3-color and the color mixing capabilities that you have. So I think this might be a pretty fun printer for modders. I wouldn't recommend it to a beginner, and it's probably a little finicky to get working. I'm going to put this in the flawed tier just because it doesn't scream quality. Maybe I'm being biased here, but maybe average tier. It's interesting. It's an interesting printer, so I appreciate what they're doing there. Now we got some Kingroon machines. This is the KP3S. I'm going to put it in the flawed tier. I got one of these in for review and it didn't work all that well, so now here's the Kingroon KLP1, which is their high-speed Core XY printer that's supposed to compete with like the Bambu Lab and all that kind of stuff. What I like about this machine is they're using linear rails, and this appears to be a very serviceable design. I call their quality control into question just because they're coming in on such a low price point that it's like, can they afford to do any quality control? Are these things going to be any good? The one review I saw of one of these, it wasn't working properly. So I would probably put this as a flawed tier. Great idea, probably just a poor execution. If it proves to be a high quality printer, then that's probably going to be in the S or A tier, just because it's going to combine serviceability, high-speed printing, enclosed printer. I'm not holding my breath for this thing being a home run in terms of quality. So that's going to be a C tier or maybe a B tier. I mean, I'm a little bit excited for it, so we'll see what happens. Longer LK4 and the longer LK5. Now, I reviewed this longer LK5. It was a great machine, produced excellent prints right out of the box. It is kind of a tired old design. It's just too similar to an Ender 3. If they would innovate a little bit, then I'd have a little more respect for them, but it's just a basic bed slinger. And this LK5 is a 300 by 300 by 400 millimeter printer that's running a Bowden tube. So it gets good print quality, but I wouldn't recommend it just because it's a Bowden tube. Here's the Lulzbot Taz. I talked to them at Midwest Rep Festival. They had a lot of cool stuff on display. In terms of price, they're just a little expensive compared to their competitors. I probably wouldn't buy one myself just because of the pricing, so we'll put that in the dollar bills tier. Nice printer, but over budget. This is the MakerBot method, and again, this is one of those companies where the printers start in the thousands, not the hundreds, so not really relevant to a hobbyist. They might be a great machine for industrial or professional use, but it's just too expensive for me. Same with this Markforged. Now, Markforged is doing some really cool stuff with carbon fiber toe. So they have a carbon fiber spool that they can embed into your printed parts and add extra strength and stiffness where you need it. So that would definitely be an S tier if it was affordable. Since it's too expensive for me, we're going to be dropping this down to the dollar bill tier. That's kind of out of the reach of most hobbyists. Here's the Mingda Magician X Max. Any Mingda product, I'm just going to be throwing that off the balcony. I got my Mingda Magician X2 in for review, and basically it had a fault with the main board or the thermistor or something, and I could get it to just massively overheat and melt the aluminum heater block. So definitely be throwing that off the balcony. I would not run that printer without adult supervision. Here's the Pantheon design. I forget what they call this printer, but it's just a massive box of high-end motion control components. They've got ball screws, they've got large diameter linear rods. This thing can run extremely fast and produce clean parts without input shaper even being turned on. This thing's built more like a CNC machine than a 3D printer, so it's just a really high-end machine. I would definitely be dropping it up here in the S tier. I'm even wearing the Pantheon design shirt today. I met those guys at Rapid TCT. They seem like some cool dudes. However, given the price of this printer is around $10,000, we're gonna be unfortunately putting it in the dollar bill tier. And then we've got the Positron. This is the upside down printer. It's a really cool concept. It's super compact, prints upside down to save space, and it's using some synchro belts, which are like these special motion control components, which just really helps them maintain this really small and tight packaging. I'm gonna put this in the flawed tier, because it's upside down. I mean, why is it upside down? Can someone explain that to me? All right, sorry guys. I mean, it's a cool printer. It's an S tier in terms of how legendary and cool it is. However, it's upside down. Why are they making printers upside down now? I don't get it. All right, and now time for the moment everybody's been waiting for. The PRUSA machines. Despite what everybody believes, I actually like PRUSA products. They're well built, reliable, simple, open source. You know, there's a lot of good things about them. I think their latest turn towards producing more of their own proprietary hardware is a little bit problematic. However, they are continuing to innovate and they continue to offer their products at a somewhat affordable price point. Yeah, I think they're a little overpriced for what they are, but they're not in the thousands of dollars, except for this guy right here, the PRUSA XL. That thing's a little expensive and late to the party. But let's go ahead and rank these. So starting with the PRUSA Mini, I think that's going up here as an S tier. That's a really cool printer. It's not super expensive. Sure, you pay a premium for it, but you're getting support. You're supporting the company behind Printables, which is a great platform that a lot of people use to share and find 3D printed models. So, I mean, it's a nice printer. If I had one, I'd probably use it just because it's small and cute and fun to use. It's like a higher quality Ender 2 Pro. So I think that's a cool product. We'll give it an S tier. Here's the PRUSA i3 Mark IV. We're gonna give that a very good printer rating. I would actually maybe bump it down to average tier when you consider the price point that it's coming in at. It's a little expensive for what it is. Again, you're getting that customer support, a pretty streamlined user experience and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think it's a good printer, but again, given the price, I'd probably consider it an average tier printer. Now, this PRUSA Mini, I would like to see this come down in price even a little bit more than it is already. But it's a cool printer. A lot of people use them on print farms, so that's gonna go in the S tier. PRUSA XL, this one's a bit controversial. It's been something like 2 years since they first announced it, and they're still not shipping orders. I mean, if you pre-ordered it, you can get one, but it's a little bit slow. It's a little bit expensive, so we're gonna put that in the flawed tier. And the heated bed assembly on this thing is just a little bit overcomplicated, so we're gonna leave that in flawed tier. If PRUSA would have delivered this thing on time, I would probably be putting it up here in the very good tier, because at the time it was announced, it was outstanding in terms of the features that it was bringing to the table. Even at that elevated PRUSA premium price, I think it would have been a really great printer. 2 years later, there's a lot of competition on the market. I'm going to have to bump this thing down to either average tier or even flawed tier, just because of the time that it's taken to get this thing out to market. I might even throw it into dollar bills tier, but frankly, it's not as expensive as these other printers for what it's offering. So it is a pretty interesting machine, regardless of the delays that it's had. Those delays, that's a big problem. That's going to be securing its spot in the flawed tier. Now we have some Qidi machines. I didn't bother to put all of them on here, but you can kind of generalize my thoughts on those printers based on where I place these. So here's the Qidi X-Max 2. This one was released several years ago. It's a super heavy printer. It had a print volume of like 300 by 250. So a relatively large build volume, fully enclosed, so an interesting feature set. They were using a bunch of proprietary parts, and I just don't think it was the best designed machine. Also, it has kind of a plasticky feeling because all of these plastic panels on the outside just make it feel a little bit cheap. And I literally threw this one off of a balcony, so I'm going to be putting this in the D tier. The Qidi X-Max 3, now this is where Qidi are hopefully turning things around a little bit. This has a print bed that's 330 by 330 millimeters, so it's quite large. It's actually larger than the K1 Max and offers a lot of the same speed and features. And I think it even includes a heated enclosure, so it actually heats up the air inside of the enclosure, which is pretty interesting. I think I'm going to give this an A tier. Depending on the execution and how good their implementation of Clipper and firmware is, this could get bumped up to an S tier or even down to a B or C tier. I'm hopeful about this machine's quality. We'll see how it turns out. I'm going to be getting one of these in for review, so, subscribe to the channel if you want to see that. Then we've got the X Plus 3, which seems to be a pretty nice machine. It's just a slightly smaller version of the X Max, so it makes it a little less interesting, so I'm going to be putting that in the B tier. It's nice that they're producing these printers at a variety of price points and sizes. I'm just not all that interested in a small printer that has these features. What sets this X Max apart from its competition is its size. Since it's so big, it really sets itself apart from the Bambu Lab machines and even the K1 Max. However, this one is like in that K1 Max / Bambu Lab machine size range, so it's going to be a B. The other thing about Qidi machines is they tend to have kind of a cheap plasticky feel because of all those plastic cladding and panels that they put on there. I'm still hopeful. We'll see how these machines perform, and just looking at the spec sheet, it looks like a pretty good printer. The Raise 3D E2CF, this is like an industrial grade carbon fiber printer. Again, this machine is priced in the thousands, so it's going in the over budget tier. And now we have some interesting printers. These are some homemade kind of kit printers. This is the Rook. This is a printer that was designed by fellow YouTuber Rolahan. I think that one's going straight to S tier. I think it's a cool design. It's really low cost, really high speed, and there's some derivatives of this design, such as the 100, so you should check out some videos on the 100 3D printer if you want to see some really cheap, small, high-speed printing. It's just a really cool design. Then we've got the RatRig V-Core here. This is basically like a big cube 3D printer that you can build. I haven't tried one out, so I don't really know enough about it to form a great opinion about it. I would put it in the B tier. Now, this would be an A tier. Apparently, once you put them together, they're pretty good printers. Just knowing what I know from my previous experience with my RatRig V-Minion, they tend to use too many fasteners on their designs. I mean, you gotta value the time of the people putting these kits together, and if you're having to put like 100 fasteners onto a printer when you could get away with maybe doing 40 or 50 fasteners, that additional fastener count is going to increase cost. It's going to increase the amount of time it takes to do rework, like if you have to repair or rebuild part of the machine, and it just makes a worse user experience overall. So I think RatRig needs to go through and do some fastener optimization on their design. Now, speaking of RatRigs, let's rank this V-Minion. I put one of these together. It was a pretty fun printer. I would put it as an S tier. However, the fastener count and the amount of time and overcomplication of some of the components is what's holding it back. I think if they did some design optimization, this could be an easy S tier. So I'm looking forward to a RatRig V-Minion V2 if that's coming out. I would really like to see it with an emphasis on, easier, faster to assemble, kind of improvements there. Seckit SK Go or SK Tank or whatever, these Seckit printers. Apparently you can buy this from this guy in Taiwan that puts these kits together, and they're really high quality steel frames. From what I've heard, the rest of the design could use a little bit of work, like the tool head and that kind of stuff. It's got one of the most solid frames of any printer on the market, which deserves some respect. So altogether, I would say the printer is somewhat flawed, based on what I've heard about the hot end and needing some improvements. I'm going to bump it up to average tier. And once you've done some customization and fixed some of these little bugs, I think this could easily be an S tier. As the facts stand, and with what little information I have on this printer, I'm going to leave it as a B tier, average printer. All right, now here's the Snapmaker printers. Here's the Snapmaker A350T, or A, I don't know exactly which one it is. Then here's the Snapmaker Artisan, which can be purchased with this optional enclosure. And then here's the Snapmaker J1, which is an enclosed IDEX printer. So independent dual extruders. Pretty cool feature set there. For the A350 and Artisan, this one's going off the balcony for sure. The A350A, when you change the functions out, like if you want to switch from laser cutting to 3D printing, it takes forever. And the actual 3D printing mode of it is not as strong as a lot of the other 3D printers on the market. It's actually a pretty poor performance as a 3D printer. Super slow, super loud. It's got loud stepper motors. To change it over to the other functions that they advertise, like laser cutting and CNC machining, you have to undo and refasten like 50 screws. And I am not going to waste my time doing that. So it's going straight off the balcony. The Snapmaker Artisan, apparently they fixed that issue. Now it's super expensive. It's like $2,000 to $3,000 for that machine. I'm not paying that, so that's going in the dollar bills tier. And if I was forced to buy it, I would consider it flawed, or it would be going off the balcony. We're going to leave that in the dollar bills tier. Now the Snapmaker J1 actually looks like a pretty interesting machine. It's IDEX, fully enclosed, and apparently works pretty good. So I'll put that in the B tier as an average printer. Probably still a little outside of most people's price range, but it offers some interesting capabilities, and there's not a whole lot of other IDEX printers on the market. Speaking of IDEX printers, we've got the Sovol SVO2. It's an independent dual extruder bed slinger. Pretty cool design. I'm gonna put that on the average tier. It's not outstanding in any way, but it offers a cheap entry level into IDEX printing. I think it's like $500 to $600 for one of these machines. And it's got a print volume that's pretty large, 300 by 300 by 400, I believe. So it's an interesting printer. Now here's some other Sovol designs. Here's the SVO6 Plus, the SVO6 Regular Edition, and then the SVO7. The SVO6s are basically PRUSA i3 clones, so both of them I would say are average printers. I wouldn't be disappointed with either of these printers if I had one. However, mine, I reviewed this SVO6, mine had a couple of small issues with the with some skipped layers, some layer shifts, because the stepper motor for the x-axis wasn't receiving enough current. So I had to go in there onto the main board and turn the little screwdriver to adjust the stepper motor voltage and current. It was pretty annoying to do that, and for that reason, it's not the best printer. So it has some pros and cons to it. Overall, I'd say it's an average printer. The SVO7, I really like this printer. It comes with clipper, it uses V-groove wheels. I really don't mind V-groove wheels that much, but I would say that's a very good printer. You're getting higher print speeds. V-groove wheels are quieter. I mean, there's pros and cons to it, but I don't really mind them that much. So we're going to put that in the A tier just because it's another high-speed printer. I would say the Neptune 4 and SVO7 are pretty evenly matched. It does come with working Wi-Fi, so it's a bit of a back and forth there. I just like the overall design of the Neptune 4 more. It just looks cooler. I mean, that's really what a lot of this comes down to, isn't it? Here's the TwoTrees Sapphire. This is a pretty neat printer. It's probably flawed though. From the reviews I've seen of it, they tend to have quality issues. They're not the most sturdy machines overall, so we'll leave that as a flawed tier. Here's the Tronxy XS300 or 500 or whatever. Tronxy makes a ton of Core XY 3D printers. They're in the Core XY game before anybody, but they're just kind of cheaply constructed. I do think they offer an excellent platform for modding and upgrading, so I'll put this in average tier. Probably flawed tier if you're looking for a good stock experience, but given that it's probably a good platform for modding, I'll leave it as a B tier. And then we've got the Tronxy Crux. I think this is an excellent printer for beginners. It's a lot of no nonsense. You just plug it in and print with it, and it's really sturdy and easy to put together. So I'm going to put that as a B tier. A good printer for a beginner. It's not outstanding in any way, but it just runs. All right, then we've got the Ultimaker. Basically, all the Ultimakers are super expensive and out of my price point, so they're going in the dollar bills tier. Here's some interesting printers coming up. We've got the Vorons. So Voron V0. That is an easy S tier. That's a cool printer design. It's nice and small, gets people introduced to Clipper and building their own high-speed machines. And these machines can be pushed really fast because of how small and compact they are. So just a fun, relatively inexpensive printer to play around with. That's definitely an S tier. All right, and then we've got the Voron 2.4, which is kind of a classic design. This thing's been around for a while. It's one of the original high-speed Core XY printers, and it's mostly made out of 3D printed parts. Really interesting project there. I'm gonna go ahead and put this, I kind of want to put it at an S tier, but given how many parts there are, I mean, geez, they're using like 4 stepper motors for the Z-axis and 4 linear rails and 4 belts. It just seems a little overcomplicated for what it is. So that's holding it back from being a legendary printer, even though it is somewhat of a legend these days. There's probably some flaws with the design that I'd like to see improved. All right, and then there's the Voron Trident. Now this one, it seems to be like an upgraded version of the 2.4. That looks like it's a little bit easier to put together. It uses a slightly reduced part count. So, you know, I'm a fan of simplicity. I like how they've simplified the design a little bit and made it less expensive. I'll probably put the Trident up here at S tier. I like how it's moddable. You can do all sorts of upgrades on these machines, and it just seems like a pretty fun thing to use. Now, apparently there's a tool changer version of the 2.4, which utilizes that Z-axis, so it moves up to the top of the printer, grabs a new print head, and moves back down and continues printing. However, in general, I hate the idea of a tool changer printer having extra parts and electronics and heating elements and stuff. It's just making things overcomplicated. If you have multiple extruders, I want them to be IDEX so that you can use all the extruders at the same time instead of having this bank of expensive accessories sitting up top. You might draw a parallel between that and a CNC machine, which has like a spindle with like hundreds of different tools that it can switch between for doing different machining operations. However, I don't think it's similar there because a majority of the cost of a 3D printer is in the hot end. So if you have 4 hot ends, that's multiplying that portion of the cost by 4. On CNC machines, the tools are relatively inexpensive compared to the overall machine. So having a bunch of those loaded up is not expensive, and it's even necessary for it to do its function. With this, having a tool changer is just kind of silly in my opinion. Now we've got some Voxelab machines. Now my channel started out with a Voxelab to Ender 3 comparison, which was a really fun video, one of my old classics. Voxelab machines are just kind of boring derivatives of Ender 3 clones. They might have slightly better quality control than Creality, and they might be a little bit cheaper and offer more features. However, it is just kind of yet another boring, bland Ender 3 clone. Now we've got 3 printers left here. We've got the VZBot. That thing is absolutely legendary. Vez is an awesome guy. He has a YouTube channel and documents a lot of his experimentation with the VZBot design. I think that's an easy S tier because he's pushing that machine to insane print speeds, and now it's something that you can buy on AliExpress. You can get a kit. It's like $1,300 or so, and you can build one of these yourself. So that's an easy S tier. Just schooling all of these big established brands in terms of producing a higher quality, faster print speed kind of 3D printer, just as a 1 or 2 man operation with his little community of support. So really impressive there. That's an easy S tier just because high print speeds, large printing, doing some unique and novel stuff in the design. Then we've got the Wuxn WXR 3D printer. This thing is basically a PRUSA i3 Mark III clone. So I'm gonna put it as a B tier. Basically on par with the PRUSA i3. It's made in America. If that matters to you, then, you know, you can get one of those. It seems like a pretty nice design overall. Given the price point that it's at and the features that it offers, I'm going to say it's an average printer. I might bump that up to an A tier if they develop some Clipper firmware, maybe even an S tier. But yeah, it's just too similar to a PRUSA i3 Mark III. And our last printer of the day is going to be the Zortrax A200. That one's definitely going off the balcony. I saw a couple videos about this thing and it just seems like a proprietary mess. I mean, normally I would put it in the over budget too expensive option, but given what I know about this thing, it just looks like a, I don't know. I'm gonna throw this thing off the balcony if I'm being honest. All right, and last thing, I think I might want to make a couple adjustments here. This Creality belt printer, I'll put it as a flawed tier. I doubt it works very well, but it's an interesting concept and it's somewhat novel. And I want to retroactively unthrow this Ghost 6 off my balcony. I really should have kept it because I do think it's a good printer. It's a cheap, affordable Core XY machine that comes in at a really good price point. So, you know, pretty nice printer there. In terms of the rest of these, I might actually bump the K1 up to an S tier because it has insane print speeds. Watching one of these zip around and print things crazy fast is really fun. So looking at these S-tier printers, of course there's my channel, which is the best channel in the universe. Everybody like and subscribe to this video. We got the P1S, that's just an awesome printer. Excellent value, lets you print ABS, polycarbonate, PLA, PETG, basically anything that you want to, aside from those hardened materials. And even if you want to do the hardened materials, you can do a little upgrade and put a new nozzle and extruder in there and you'll be all set. For under $1,000 for this and the AMS, it's a pretty cool option. Ender 3 V3 SE, I'm looking forward to testing that machine out. That should be a new high watermark in the Ender 3 lineup if it delivers on its promises. We got the Elegoo Neptune 4. I just really liked how cheap and no nonsense this machine was. There's the Neptune 4 and the Neptune 4 Pro. I would stay away from the Pro model. The only upgrade you get there is it has metal rails instead of Delrin V-Groove wheels. I like the Delrin V-Groove wheels because they make the machine quieter. Then we got the PRUSA Mini, really cool machine there. It's just a stripped down, less expensive version of that i3 Mark III. Should offer a pretty good user experience and just be a reliable printer. I would totally enjoy using one of these if I had one. There's the Rook, just making a dirt cheap 4XY high-speed printer. That's really cool to see, and it just goes to show that 3D printing doesn't have to be expensive. You can put a Rook together for around $300, $400. And if you find a bunch of scavenged parts, you could do it for even cheaper, maybe $100 to $200. So, pretty cool option there. Voron V0, I mean, that's an absolute legendary little printer. They look really fun. They take up almost no counter space, and they're hugely upgradable. So, we're going to put that in the S tier. Here's the Voron Trident. You can get a larger version of this, so it's basically like a V0 in its capabilities and overall design principles, but it's larger. You can get a large format 3D printer up to 350 by 350 and do some bigger prints at high speeds, and it's hugely moddable. So if you want to have fun modding things, I think you can probably set this up as an IDEX. It runs Clipper by design, so it's a great machine for the modders, and you can 3D print new parts out for it, and it's got a great community around it from everything that I've heard. Then you've got the VZBot. That thing is crazy fast. There's a bunch of fun videos you can watch by Simon Vez, so subscribe to his channel if you want to check those out. And then the K1, the Annex Engineering K1. That's a cool little design, and it's probably one of the fastest machines that I've seen in person, just rattling around and printing things super fast. So that's my tier list. Make sure to check out this tier list in the video description if you want to make your own list, and subscribe to my channel. Support me on Patreon. I posted my listing of this on Patreon. And actually, I did another version of this. Every time you do one of these, you fill the answers out a little bit different. So it would be interesting to compare this to my old list. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about this. A lot of printers are going off the balcony. A lot of printers are just boring Ender 3 clones. But there's also a lot of genuinely good and exciting printers out there on the market. So check the description for some affiliate links if you're interested in buying any of these S-tier printers or A-tier. Those are going to be some of your best value and funnest to use 3D printers on the market, in my humble opinion. If anyone else on YouTube wants to make a list like this, follow that link and make sure to put my channel up here in the S tier. I mean, you can throw my channel off the balcony, or you might think that my channel is flawed, but I think the real answer here, the only answer that's acceptable, is S tier. All right, well, thanks for watching this episode of Nathan Builds Robots. I'll see you in the next video.